Thank you so much. So, okay. We are probably too many in order to make a round of the table to present each other, all of us. So we thought to have this very simple slide just to say that we have basically a bit more than 40 registered participants, and then we are already more than 30. And we are covering different component of the landscape of institution and initiative and project and research infrastructure, both European, national, and international, that are interested in the biodiversity monitoring, biodiversity conservation and recovery. And so we are to this workshop, we have participants for the Biodiversa Plus partner, for the National Database Initiative, from the EC institution, and from European International Database Initiative, and a number of other institutions. If you can go to the next one, please. Okay, here we have the agenda that all of you should have received. This very short introduction to the meeting from myself and the Biodiversa Plus Chair and Coordinator Hilde Egermon. Then we will have a number of presentations on data architecture and data flow in Europa Bonn by Dani Villero and Nestor Fernandez of Europa Bonn. Presentation of the data flow in GBIF and diversifying the GBIF model by Tim Hirsch. Presentation of metadata structure and workflow in LiFoCheric by Lucia Vaira. DNA metabarcoding, bioscan, eyeball, infrastructure development by Rutger Voss. And then a section with an open discussion on the barriers preventing data interoperability, the factor encouraging the data operability, and possible support for Biodiversa Plus. We are going to have a break in the middle since we have basically planned 3 hours of discussion. So at about 10:30, we are going to have a short break. And then if you go to the next one, just to give a short introduction on the aims of the meeting and the aims of Biodiversa Plus in this context that is dealing with harmonization and interoperability of biodiversity monitoring data set, and then also all those kind of digital objects that can be useful in order to handle the data, to analyze the data, to modeling the data, and then to produce knowledge from the data. Then we have a few aims on that, those on the understanding of data architecture and operating data flow in Europe. Of course, exchanging the view of the different actors, and then it's one of the major aim and objective of this meeting, that we start with this workshop with the organization on the working group, to which the participants of this workshop are also going to participate, and also to discuss how Biodiversa Plus could help to harmonize the database, to improve interoperability, and to support the overall objective of the transnational biodiversity monitoring. And we are going to pursue the same in connection with the biodiversity monitoring priority at the different level, from national to international level, in connection with the running activity in the major international initiative and project. And that's the way we have invited you, and we thank you so much for participating to the meeting. And in connection with the running initiative in the ESFRI landscape of European research infrastructure that are mainly in the biosphere and in the biodiversity domain. The landscape of the actors on this issue is really wide, and then is one of the aim of this activity in Biodiversa Plus to support the networking and to give a floor in the space for the discussion. Can you go to the next one? Just the very final one is also a consideration that also raised the relevance of this workshop and the discussion among us, is that considering that the biodiversity data probably represent one of the most challenging field in the area of the environmental data, for the much higher complexity with respect to the geospatial data or to the genomic and metagenomic data that biodiversity data has, for a number of reasons that surely are on the table for all of you. So the wide type of data that are going to be part of the research on biodiversity and on the issue of biodiversity, that not only deals with the taxonomical aspect, but also address all the different type of functional traits that are affecting actually the biodiversity organization, maintenance and conservation, for the different methodologies and techniques that are part of data collection, that also involve the updating the methodology in the tools that we use for collecting data, particularly when we are collecting data with different type of sensor that evolve through time and also create some sort of discontinuity in the type of data, for the standardization of the data in terms of how we then are expressing the data that are dealing with biodiversity, and for the standardization of metadata. All these issues actually are going to be part of the harmonization, considering that in the harmonization we also need to have in mind the reusability of the data, and therefore to consider not only the type of data, but the methodology of collection. All this kind of issue has to be part of the discussion we're going to have today. If you go to the next one, then this workshop is a first step for running the activity of the working group that Biodiversa is planning to have on this specific issue. And so we have initial reflection on how to take up proposal from this workshop in Biodiversa Plus work plan, and we hope that we are going to have the collaboration of all of you on this activity, to include the national perspective, and so to showcases of national data architecture plan and data workflow that we plan to identify and map, and then we have component and a representative of the national institution that are running, that are responsible for the national monitoring today in the workshop, so that we also hope to have their contribution. And then follow up of this workshop with presentation of national and also subnational, regional, where it is the case, showcases that are going to be organized in the next months. Then we are planning to have a public report showcasing the national and global data architecture and workflow. And then we hope that we all are going to develop synergy in this activity, and we can work on that together. And surely we are going to build this activity on the relevant activity of EuropaBone and also of the other key actors that are with us today, and then they still, and again, I'm thanking for their participation. I think that that's all for this start, and then I will give the floor to Hilde for his presentation on Biodiversa Plus.
Thank you, Alberto, and also good morning to all. So what I will try to do is just briefly explaining you a bit what Biodiversa Plus, what the partnership is about, just in a nutshell, because it's quite encompassing, but just that you have a bit of an overview, because some of you might not be fully aware. So Biodiversa Plus is not an entirely new network, because it's building on an existing network, which was Biodiversa, so the predecessor. But compared to the previous network, there are a few differences. So most notably, we have moved now in what we call a co-funded partnership. So it's co-designed together with the European Commission, DG Research and DG Environment, as part of the European Biodiversity Strategy. And so it's a more sustainable structure. We started in 2021, and we will run at least until 2028. Compared to the previous Biodiversa network, we have diversified in terms of membership. So now we do not only have on board the ministries of research and the funding agencies and the foundations that was really at the heart of the previous Biodiversa, but now we also have a lot of ministries of environment and environmental protection agencies. So there's a better balance between research policy and environmental policy, which will also help us to better make the bridges between research and policy, and also complete some work when it comes to biodiversity monitoring. And also in terms of number of partners and in terms of geographical reach, we have expanded quite a lot. So we currently have 74 partners from 37 countries on board of Biodiversa Plus. And it's a very open network, so we hope that we can continue to grow over the years. And we also have collaborations with a few international players and countries. Next slide, please. So this is just to show you a bit that we have also expanded in terms of the portfolio of activities. So whereas Biodiversa was mainly focusing on promoting and supporting research on biodiversity through annual joint calls, we now also have in our portfolio a broader range of activities. So the promotion and the funding of research is still at the heart of what Biodiversa will do. It's also, most of the budget also still goes to that component. But then we also have several other activities, activities that also, for example, focus on better support for the development and the implementation of nature-based solutions, work in relation with the private sector, so that we can also help to promote the impact of business on biodiversity. There's also a component focusing specifically on this science policy interfacing, and also activities in the context of internationalization, better connection with the Convention of Biodiversity, with international biodiversity initiatives, with the EPES, and also better link between European research infrastructures and global infrastructures. But then the key component is indeed focusing also on promoting and supporting transnational biodiversity monitoring. So that's actually quite new to our work, and that's also why we have now on board more ministries of environment and environmental protection agencies. But I will come back to that later. And then also, of course, this needs sufficient funding. So the budget envelope is also quite substantial, but it's not just cash coming from the countries and from the European Commission. There's also a lot of in-kind capacity coming from the countries, and especially for the biodiversity monitoring activities. And also for the research, we plan to launch 6 co-funded calls over the next few years. And the next call is actually specifically targeting the topic of biodiversity monitoring. So this is just to show the wide portfolio of activities, and today we will mainly focus on the biodiversity monitoring component and how we can also support that when it comes to data operability. Next slide, please. So this is again just to show the different work packages and the different work streams that we have, but also to make clear that whatever we do is strongly rooted in the new European Biodiversity Strategy 2030. And of course, this aligns well with what we see emerging in the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And hopefully we will have this post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework approved by the end of the year. So we try to make strong connection with this international level as well. Next slide, please. And then this is just to show that we fully recognize that we are not the only actor in a very complex landscape. So whatever we do, we try to do it with the actors in the landscape that have a mandate for certain aspects of our portfolio. So we have strong collaborations with many of these, but not only with these initiatives, but also with other partnerships. So Biodiversa, we have the Biodiversity Partnership. It was the first of 40 partnerships that kicked off, but now we have more and more partnerships in the landscape. And also when we want to tackle biodiversity as a more transversal issue, we need to collaborate with other partnerships, including, for example, partnerships dealing with blue economy or with agroecology or with driving urban transitions and a few others. So just to say that we don't work in isolation, but we do want to do this in collaboration with these other initiatives and really avoid duplication. But it's not always easy because the landscape is super complex. Next slide, please. And this is just to zoom in a bit on the work that we do on biodiversity monitoring. I will not go into the details, but the overarching aim would be to help supporting this transnational biodiversity monitoring. And there are several components to the work that we do, components that we also see very well reflected in the work of Europabon, and I'm sure that the colleagues from Europabon will also speak to that. We recognize that there are a lot of bottlenecks to overcome when it comes to setting up these harmonized monitoring schemes. It's not just about availability of data, but it's also about indeed interoperability. It's also about harmonization of protocols, of methods, developing even new methods for biodiversity monitoring. And then we also want to go all the way to better use of monitoring data, not only by researchers, but also by private and public decision making. So we try to cover the whole gradient, but mainly focusing on capacity building activities and not just on the very technical know-how, but really exchanging of best practices and connecting existing infrastructures. Next slide. I think that was it for me. I don't know if you have any general question on Biodiversa Plus before we continue. Otherwise, we can take maybe a few quick questions. I don't see immediately. Okay, then I hand over again to Alberto, who will introduce the next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hilda. Thank you so much. Then I will ask Cecile if she is going to help us also in keeping the time. We are more or less on time, so we are going to go on this way. And then I am going to give the floor to Dani Vileiro, who has been the mind behind the Europabon monitoring database and will present the Europabon biodiversity monitoring database, followed by Nestor Fernandez, who will discuss about the essential biodiversity variables. So Dani and Nestor, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? I will try to share my screen.
Okay, thanks. We hear you very well and we see the screen.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is Dani Vileiro and I am a researcher from the CREAF in Barcelona. And I am not the only mind behind the Europabon database. I have contributed, I have been involved in the design and the development of the Europabon, but we have a big team of people, IT engineers. I have a wide experience in the design of databases, but not in the development and the IT details of the development. So I'm going to give you a general overview of the database, mainly focus on the questions and the needs behind the database, not and how it is helping Europabon to fulfill specific objectives of the project. First, let me introduce a few words about Europabon for those who are unfamiliar with the project. Europabon is an Horizon 2020 project devoted to overcome existing data gaps and workflow bottlenecks by designing a framework for monitoring biodiversity and ecosystem services in the EU. Only one of the specific objectives of the project is to map how biodiversity data collected in monitoring schemes across Europe flows through different institutions and programs and is processed to produce essential biodiversity variables, essential ecosystem services variables, and other policy relevant indicators. After my talk, Nestor Fernandez will give you more information about data standards for the essential biodiversity variables and the work done on the GeoBond portal. So I will hurry up to leave time for questions. As I said, one specific objective of the project is to map data workflows from field monitoring efforts to policymakers in order to assess how biodiversity monitoring capabilities are covering the information needs of policies related with the European Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, Habitats and Bites Directives, Water Framework Directives, etc. So we are interested to know what taxa are currently well monitored, the geographic coverage of biodiversity data and the nature of monitoring programs, and if the current monitoring schemes are temporally sustainable and cost efficient. We need to answer all these questions to identify monitoring gaps and bottlenecks and limitations on the mobilization and harmonization of monitoring data, in order to co-design workflows needed for a more integrated biodiversity observation network that can close gaps and reduce bottlenecks to support EU policies and targets as the EU Restoration Law, etc. To map all these data workflows, we have designed the EuropaBond monitoring database based on 3 pillars. The first pillar is the integration nodes, the blue circles in the figure, including networks that integrate biodiversity data from monitoring schemes and process them to produce aggregated biodiversity data, or essential biodiversity variables, essential ecosystem services variables, or other policy relevant indicators that can be or not updated, taken by policy, the orange and red diamonds. The second pillar is the biodiversity data, the green squares in the figure. In our approach, mainly focused on monitoring efforts that are coordinated at a transnational level, combining bottom-up and top-down approaches. And data streams are as the third pillar, focused on data workflows and not only on data collection. A good example of the integration initiatives is the European Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. Showing these network plots, you can see a European node, the central blue circle, that is fed by aggregated data, the violet dashed lines, from national and subnational nodes, the crown of blue circles in the figure, which in turn are fed by raw data, the red lines coming from the green squares that represent the monitoring project aimed to collect biodiversity data. As a result of this complex integration process, the European node produced different outcomes such as grassland, woodland, and urban butterfly indicators, among others. The orange diamonds in the plot. Another good example is the Pan-European Common Bird Monitoring Scheme with similar patterns, network patterns, but slight difference in how the national nodes fit the Central European node. In this case, using indicators, the green dashed lines in these green dashed lines in the plot, and not aggregated data as in the European Butterfly Monitoring Scheme. Sorry. All this information is gathered in the EuropaBond monitoring database, an online database based on common data standards such as UNCOR and EML that can be accessed through the EuropaBond website. This is the main page of the data portal where you can easily find the 3 pillars of the database, the integration nodes, the biodiversity data, and the data streams. And query all the data gathered until today, including around 850 integration nodes, 960 records of the biodiversity data, and more than 1,000 data streams. Also, there are other searching tools allowing geographic, for example, the number of integration nodes per country, or network plots for all the data streams included in the database. Let's see some interesting outcomes from the database. For example, in relation to integration nodes, NGOs are the main actors in terms of data integration, closely followed by research institutions and a little bit far by governments. Regarding the origin of and types of data, 62% of the biodiversity data correspond to systematic monitoring programs. Count data is the most common type of data collected. The purpose of most data sources is to advance in ecological knowledge of species, and only a small fraction of all data sources collected are open access. If we look at the data flows at European level, only around a fifth part of the data flows have been mapped to essential biodiversity variables, as seen in this figure, and less than 1% to essential ecosystem services variables. Finally, beyond descriptive outcomes, nowadays we are working the gaps and bottlenecks analysis with the aim to fit the co-design for the workflows needed for a more integrated biodiversity observation network. Sorry. As shown with the flower plot in this flower plot, where we see that we have a strong bottom, where we try to represent the bottlenecks for building the ecosystem, the essential biodiversity variable from the EVA2 dataset, that shows that we have strong bottlenecks related with the software, the open code, and matching the EBB with the results. Thanks for your attention, and please do not hesitate to have a look into the Europabon monitoring database and share with us any comment or suggestion. I pass the word to Nestor, who will go a little bit deeper with essential biodiversity variables data standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Celine and Alberto, and all the others for the opportunity to present some of the relevant work of Europabon. I'm trying to share my screen right now. Please give me a sign if you can see my first slide. Yeah, okay, yes. Thank you. So what I'm going to present now is the data standards and the portal that we have been developing already for a few years within GeoBon, partly funded also with another H2020 project, which is called eShape, which is relevant for EuroGeo, and now is this standard and the portal is adopted in Europabon. And let me explain with this slide what is the problem that we are trying to address in terms of delivering data in a consistent and interoperable way. So monitoring data and the essential biodiversity variables in particular usually contain a time series of biodiversity data over time, and with the EPVs, with the essential biodiversity variables, what we aim to obtain is actually spatially explicit data, so spatially continuous data. The issue here is that depending on what kind of biodiversity attribute, whether it is species, communities, or ecosystem types, the data may be very different. So, for example, for species data sets, you usually have many different species from different groups, different countries, in different ecosystems. When you are addressing biodiversity characterization via looking at ecosystems, it's the same. For example, you could have different ecosystems of the habitat directives or of the UNIS classification, etc. Very often, the essential biodiversity variables are derived through remote sensing or via modeling. Yeah, and this means that also you will have different kind of products, and very often people organize those outputs in many different ways. So, like for example, having the time series in folders of TIFF files, or in netcdf files, and with no consistent characterization. So at the moment, it doesn't exist anything like a standard for classifying those data and for informing those data. So this is exactly what we call the EPV3 standard aims to address. And it is to provide a consistent way of organizing the data and documenting the data in a way that the different data sets are interoperable among each other, and they can be combined, for example, to derive indicators from several of them. So this EPV3 addresses directly the essential biodiversity variables as classified according to two main aspects of biodiversity, we can call them. So one is when you look at a species, yeah. So for example, you look at the variability in the distributions across a species, or spatial variability in the traits of a species, etc. So that would be the species-focused EPVs, such as, for example, species populations distributions or abundances, trace variability, etc. And then the second main axis is the one that integrates across species and communities, etc. So this could be the ecosystem focus. And here we include EBVs and community composition, ecosystem structure, and ecosystem function. So what we are aiming to do is to provide this standard that is able to classify data set in the same way for all those diversity of data sets. So how should we organize such disparity of data? So first, we need that the metadata is consistent, no matter if you are addressing species focus or ecosystem focus EBVs. The data sets that are produced should be interoperable, so they should be immediately be able to be used and combined because they are structured in a consistent way. And finally, they should be easily accessible to any kind of users. And as Hilde also said before, we are also trying to facilitate access to policymakers or to people in administrations, experts in the administrations that may use the data. The EPB portal is one of the two components of this strategy. Please visit it in portal.geobond.org. I'm not going to show the portal in detail because there is no time. If we have more time later, I can guide you a little bit through it. But in principle, it has three main components. One component is a catalog of the biodiversity data sets, and you can find for different ecosystems, for different regions, etc. At the moment, we have something around 25. I think it's a bit higher, the figure now, but around 25 EBV data sets mobilized in this portal. And so we have this searching tool and this catalog capacity to be able to explore across the different data sets. And then we have also a mapping tool where you can explore over time changes in the data set. So for example, if you have a collection of species distributions, you can explore in the map over time the changes for each of those species. And also we have created a couple of tools to facilitate the mobilization of this data according to the EBV standard in this portal. One of them is an upload tool, so you can register in this database and then upload your data according to some instructions that you will see in the screens. And also you can format your data with an R code, an R package that is called EBV Cube that we have produced, and it will be very soon available in the Crown repository. So the data sets in this portal are consistently structured across the thematic, spatial, and temporal dimensions. They are also consistently documented. As I said before, no matter if you are looking at species or ecosystems, the information is the metadata is similar in a way that it maximizes usability, and they are traceable. So one important component of it, and we are doing this through digital object identifiers and also through links, for example, to GitHub and so on, you can trace back where the data comes from. So for example, if this is a modeled data set, you will ideally, the data provider will provide the links to the DOIs of the original data, for example, that can be very nicely retrieved in GBIF, or you can provide the link to the GitHub where you specify or you describe the model. So the standard itself, and I'm going a little bit more to the technical aspects, the standard itself is based on a NetCDF specification. We have defined a unified hierarchical structure for organizing the data, and I will go briefly in the next slide through that structure. And we selected NetCDF for several reasons. One of them because it is a widely used format in the Earth observation community, but also because it allows us to specify those hierarchical structures in a very nicely and consistent way. And then this is the side of the data organization. In terms of metadata description, we are using a minimum information standard, which is based on the ACDD terms. That is the attribute convention for the discovery of data. And as I will also show in the next slides, we also provide translation to ecological metadata language and so on. So the package that you receive or that you produce is a self-contained data set in this NetCDF, where you have both the data organized in this way and also the description of the data. And it is compliant, of course, with the FAIR principles and the GEOS data management principles. Going a little bit more to the details, the structure, this hierarchical structure includes, for example, for data sets, you may create modeled data from its scenarios. And this is, of course, optional because not all those data sets have this structure inside. But then this is like the highest level in the hierarchy. Yeah. The second level is the metrics. So, for example, for a community level data set, you could have alpha diversity, but you could have also dissimilarity or any other metric. And you can provide different data sets within the NetCDF with those different metrics. Yeah. And then you can explore through the different metrics within the same file. And finally, you would have the entity that is the species in the case of species-focused TBVs, or that could be, for example, ecosystem types in the case of ecosystem-focused EBVs. This means it is also contained within the NetCDF, within the same file. You can explore via different metrics for the same entity or for different entities, etc. Embedded is the metadata. As I said before, it follows the standards of the Attribute Convention for Data Discovery, although we needed to do some modifications to comply with the EBV standards. And that includes also, of course, attribution, publication, history and processing level of the data set, geospatial and temporal attributes of the data set, and aspects related to the data and processing and models that are contained. So this is information that that the data providers can include inside our standard. And then you have a second block of standards, which is more specifically focusing on the biodiversity aspects of the data set. So, for example, what class of essential biodiversity variable it is, what name, what entities it includes, and then we are trying to match those entities, for example, in the case of a species, to the GBIF list of a species. And then you have other terms related to scenarios and metric descriptions. I can send the documentation for this, about this for whoever is interested. And then to finalize, I want to stress that there is a big focus on interoperability here, not only on interoperability between the data, but also interoperability among infrastructures. So we are facilitating that different infrastructures, and not only the EBV portal, can retrieve this data and display this data. And how we are doing this is through translation of the metadata contained in the EBV cubes to other languages. So, for example, you could get a translation to ecological metadata language. You can download a file in EML also, which complies, for example, with the standards of LTR, NEON, and Data1. And also, we are providing a JSON file, a small JSON file, so that this is still under testing, but we are already have a first version. This JSON file that then would facilitate access through other servers and webs. Okay, I already said before that we facilitate uploading the data with the EBV portal upload tool that you can find directly in the portal, also with the R package, which is called EBV Cube. And please, to get more familiarized with the portal, visit portal.geobon.org. I want also to say that we are now in the phase of starting to make this portal better known, and we will likely will try to organize an event in the Convention of Biological Diversity in the COP in December, together with Geobon, and in order to also explain to the parties that this tool is available, and try to promote the use. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Danny and Nestor, for your presentations. So now it's time for questions. If some of the people in the audience would like to raise something. I saw that there was a comment from Christos Arvanitidis saying that the European research infrastructures can cover the gaps in software and open code. And I also have Hilde raising her hand, so I don't know, Nestor and Danny, if you want to react to the comment, or if we should go to Hilde.
Yeah, I want to react. I fully agree, Christos. there are many steps in between that would require, I think, would benefit from involving research infrastructure. So, for example, for the production of EBVs, there are steps related to modeling, data aggregation, and so on. And I do think that those infrastructures, such as LifeWatch, for example, could have in the future a key role to play.
Thank you, Nestor and Hilde.
Thank you, and thank you, Nestor, also, and your colleague for this very interesting presentation. Of course, we have heard about this previously, but I think it's always good to also put it in the context of this data interoperability. But I wondered, so we see a lot about these EBVs, and we see a lot of potential, but I wondered how you perceive yourself the level of understanding and maybe already the type of use of these EBVs by relevant actors, and maybe also at the country level. How do you see this yourself, and is there anything that we as Biodiversa Network could help to further promote? It's maybe a more general question, but it's also just to understand whether you feel it's more like still at an academic exercise and showing potential, or whether it's really kind of taken up by those that would need to use it.
Yeah, no, I think it goes much beyond an academic exercise. Precisely, the goal is to facilitate use in applications. So the EBVs, for example, have been endorsed already for a few years by the CBD as a suitable way that the country should implement for monitoring biodiversity. IBES also, if you look at the IBES report, the IBES report is structured around the EBV classes, and also mention the development of the EBVs as a key aspect. And then the third star, I would say, is what EuropaBON is trying to do, which is organizing a monitoring center for biodiversity at the European level, which is based on the production of EBVs. Now, in terms of adoption at the national level, I think it's very heterogeneous. My personal experience is that in some countries they are very open to the concept, and others, of course, maybe less familiarized. But I do think that it is important, and I think this is part of the discussion and the goals of Biodiversa. It is important to promote this way, because I think it really helps member states and regions to kind of produce data in a way that then can be compared with what is done in other areas. That is on one side, and the other side also it allows them to organize what monitoring they could do. But of course there is still a lot to do there. There is a road to make. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you. And I see that we have Christos also raising his hand. So this will be our last question before we move to the next session. So Christos,
thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Cecile. That's fine. Nestor, congratulations for the presentation and the developments you have done. I think this is the start of something really important and long-lasting in the future. I'm sure that you have already secured quite a lot of investment to continue with that. As I said, in my comment, the research infrastructures will be more than willing, to collaborate and promote the idea, because that's one of the exciting examples of how we can implement actually the policies at the national or even local level or even global level. And I think that one path that I can see, is to create those trading zones between the EuropaBON and of course the GeoBON and the research infrastructures, and try to invest together. So this is where novel ideas and perhaps innovation in terms of applications and many other technological developments can occur and can help the communities and also the policy implementers and makers.
Thank you. Yeah, as I said before, I fully agree, Christoph. I do think that those contexts, those connections need to be strengthened now. Particularly, I think LifeWatch, but of course also ELTR and others have a key role here. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, thank you both for this interesting discussions. And maybe if you have additional questions, you can keep posting them in the chat. Alberto, is it okay for you if we move to GBIF?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Cecile. We are almost on time, so it's perfect. I'm happy to give the floor to Tim Hirsch, the Deputy Director of the GBIF Secretariat, who will present us the data flow in GBIF and the diversifying of the GBIF data model. So Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alberto and Cecile and all of the organizers of this workshop. And it's a great pleasure to be participating today. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see it now. So I'll be giving really a fairly brief view about the way that data flows through GBIF. It's a simplified view. Many of you will be fairly familiar with it, but I hope it will be a useful reminder to contribute to this current debate and conversation, and then touch briefly a little bit on some directions that we're moving at the moment in terms of proposals and options to diversify the current GBIF data model. So, I mean, first of all, just a little bit of a reminder of the kind of volumes and scales of data and information that GBIF currently brings together at a global level. So this is just today's view of the homepage of the portal. So we have something like a little bit over 2.2 billion species occurrence records flowing through our central services, divided up into over 75,000 separate data sets, each attached to metadata information. And those are coming to us from nearly 1,900 data publishers, as we term them, so institutions who are separately sharing data from across the world. And just the last number on that homepage, just as a reminder, is that through our literature tracking of citations via DOIs, we've been able to track about 7,500 papers that in some way are making use of data from GBIF, and that's running at something like 1,300 papers per year. Just looking again at the sort of the international scale, where are the institutions that are sharing data from a distributed network of access points? Well, that map just shows where they're distributed around the world, simply in terms of the number of publishers. It doesn't reflect the volume of data necessarily. It depends how it's sliced up. And the total number of countries coming with publishers coming through to GBIF is currently over 130, and you can see them the biggest in terms of numbers of publishers listed on the table to the right here. Bearing in mind that, first of all, this network of data providers, data publishers, extends well beyond the formal national participation in GBIF, which is currently at about 65 countries, but also bearing in mind that even if those publishers, those institutions sharing data through GBIF are located in all those different countries, it doesn't necessarily mean that the technical installations feeding that data through into GBIF are always in the country of the publishers. There are many pooled services whereby data is hosted on shared installations by institutions and, for example, some of our the GBIF national nodes. And this is just a final global view, as many of you will be familiar with, of just the density and the concentration of the location of the data. So that's to say the location of the occurrences, not where the data is physically held, with some fairly well-known geographical, taxonomic and temporal biases across the world. And just a final reminder as well, that although we are not primarily an image or multimedia store, a significant number of the records being shared through GBIF do have multimedia evidence attached to them. So we have something like a little over 100 million records with taxonomically identified images, for example. So This is just a very simplified, more of a kind of schematic view of the flow from the origins of the data on the left through to the processing part in the middle, and then the user side on the right. And I will just sort of run through each of those in turn, just to kind of give a bit of a reminder of, first of all, the diversity, both institutionally and in terms of data types, of the data that is being standardized and flowing through the GBIF system. So on the outer ring, just looking at those institutions, as many will be aware, the origins of GBIF were very much in the natural history collections community, but our publishers, our providers also range across agencies, ministries, scientific organizations, very significantly large citizen science networks. As an emerging sector, and I think a relevant one to highlight, business and business associations and consultancies are significantly sharing data through GBIF, and of course academic institutions. And then the sort of the middle ring there shows that the data that is being standardized also comes from really quite diverse and heterogeneous origins in terms of what the original evidence is. So of course we have the specimens in natural history collections, we have observations, monitoring systems of various kinds, including citizen science, including systematic monitoring systems. We have a lot of data which is being extracted in different ways from literature, from mechanized observation, including, for example, camera traps, satellite tagging of animals, etc. And again, as everyone knows, an increasingly important area is from sampling of the environment through DNA originating data, including eDNA and sampling of specimens and so on. And all of that, in a sense, and I'm going to use this in a slightly pejorative way, is being squeezed into common standards so that it can be integrated into the GBIF system and be interpreted in a way that enables a user to search across that very diverse body of evidence. And of course, critically, it's being shared under understood open licenses so that the user has understanding and certainty of the way in which that data can then be used. In that middle part, we have the processing, so an installation in which that data is held, for example, an instance of the IPT, the GBIF Integrated Publishing Toolkit, exposes its data to the GBIF crawling system and the index, where it is then processed and put out into an open API, which feeds into the portal, also off into cloud services, which I'll mention a little bit more in a second, and into additional products such as national and thematic portals. That processing and that accessibility then allows the data to be repurposed and used in a wide variety of different applications, both in terms of research across different disciplines and ultimately into policy and decisions. And you can see from some of the thematic splits there that through our tracking of those uses, that raw biodiversity data feeds into quite a broad range of societal benefit areas, really spanning the Sustainable Development Goals. And just to note that in our tracking of those onward uses, we compile that into an annual science review, and the latest version of that is online and has just been published. Looking at that process in a slightly more technical way, so on the left there you have that variety of distributed access points held by different institutions, which register via our common registry. Every time there's a change in the data through that registry, that triggers then a crawl from our central system, which happens in real time. So typically any change that is made from those access points, the publisher will see reflected in the portal, usually in a matter of minutes, but that can be longer if there's some congestion in the system with, for example, very large crawling operations. Then in the center you have the pipeline. So this is the processing of that data which is coming through from the crawling, and that will apply some standard routines, for example, mapping the data against the GBIF taxonomic backbone, looking for some inconsistencies and where necessary, flagging quality issues, and enriching data, for example, by mapping it to our mapping services, and splitting off the data so it can then be searched against, for example, by country, by location, by taxonomic group, and so on. And that then goes into the open API, which itself feeds into the portal and those onward services. So that's a very, very kind of simplified view of how the data flows through GBIF. And I mentioned briefly that in addition to the standard way of directly accessing GBIF, either through downloading from the portal or through the API, we relatively recently had started doing regular exports of all of the occurrence data from GBIF into public cloud services, initially starting with the Microsoft Planetary Computer, and then the Amazon web services, and most recently the data will be available also through Google BigQuery. And just a brief note as well, that as well as that central portal, exactly the same pipeline of data is available to feed into bespoke portals, where GBIF recently began a service of operating the back end of any portal that a user, for example, a national node or a thematic group or an individual institution, at a national level, data coming from individual institutions, or at a regional or thematic level. And you can see some of the examples of the portals that have recently been established using this hosted portal services. And I will just finish by really just a brief sketch of this process that I mentioned at the beginning, for looking at ways in which the current GBIF data model can and should be diversified, recognizing that the current process, which has served us hitherto as an efficient way of generating standardized data from that wide variety of sources, in that process has simplified and lost a lot of the richness of original data from those different types of sources as it flows through the system. So there was a current process, and I can afterwards just put the link in there, whereby through our informatics team, and especially led by head of informatics Tim Robertson and our colleague John Ryszurek, are looking at ways in which a new, more diverse, unified data model can capture much more of the richness of data coming through from these different sources of evidence and different types of data. So, and you can see the kind of case studies that are being looked at and applied through this model. Sorry, the writing is probably rather small in those boxes of case studies, but includes, for example, preserving more of the richness of what comes through from eDNA barcoding, from camera trap data, from tissue samples, from environmental community measurements, ecological survey data, and so on. And I would really just encourage anyone who is interested in not just sort of seeing where we're going on this, but having an opportunity to contribute to how this enriching the data model process can be applied. Please do look at join the webinars as they come up, and look at the recording of webinars that have already been recorded. And please do contribute your views and your use cases to help us come to some consensus view of how the next generation of GBIF data model and standards can be applied to capture richer data for the future. So I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Tim, for your presentation. And now it's also time for questions. So if some people would like to raise. Yeah, Nestor?
Thank you, Tim. So my question is about the diversified data model. So one of the big successes, I think, in GBIF has been like how easy it has been to mobilize data there. I have the feeling, also from speaking with colleagues and so on, that when the event core was introduced, this was a huge step forward, but then like less people had the expertise or were familiarized or willing to mobilize data. And then the diversified data model, I think it is a huge step forward. So it really, I think it is really, really needed. But at the same time, it makes things a little bit more difficult for people to mobilize data there. So my question is, how do you see or how GBIF is planning to facilitate this process of mobilizing more complex data with the diversified models?
Yes, thanks, Nestor. And I think you make an extremely valid point, and it's something that we're very aware of. And this is not going to be something where we're suddenly going to introduce a highly complex way of getting into GBIF, and so everything everyone learned in the past is they have to relearn and forget. There is there will be certainly a process, first of all, to ensure that those who have been using the techniques that they've learned for publishing data in current ways that they can still do that, and that as the options and the possibilities arising from the new data model come into production, into practice, that there will be needs to be clear and effective guidance that will be shared throughout our nodes community and our publisher community to bring partners along with us. So it's a kind of vague commitment, but just to note that we are extremely aware of that, and that I mean, not just that we shouldn't make the process more complex, but that we are actually always constantly looking at ways of lowering the technical threshold of getting data into GBIF anyway. So I would just say that those things are very much on our agenda, and we watch this space, I would say, in a way that we will apply this and help users to make use of the new possibilities as they come up.
Thank you, Tim. And I see that we also have 2 hands raised, one by Christos and one by Petteri. So I will give the floor to Christos and then Petteri. Then I suggest that we will do a short break. So Christos, go ahead.
Thanks, Cecile. GBIF is the largest biodiversity data aggregator, and I totally agree with Nestor that the event issue was a big leap towards the future, I'd say, because there are so many other aggregators of information, and they do not necessarily refer to a name, to a scientific name, and therefore the event would be very helpful in obtaining information on various taxa. Some of those could be, just at the level of sequences. What I would like, to bring here is that GBIF right now is collaborating with many other actors in the biodiversity arena, and they're building currently the biodiversity knowledge hub, whose the objective, the primary objective, is to give the user access to many data sources simultaneously, and also to give the user the opportunity, the option to make very complex questions about data and get answers back. And at GBIF, we will take care of this biodiversity knowledge hub after the end of the project, and therefore this way the scope of GBIF will be really widened in the next 4 or 5 years, and that's also a major leap I think in the near future that GBIF makes.
Thank you, Christos. Tim, do you want to react? Or...
Well, I saw that as mainly a comment rather than a question, but I would certainly agree with Christos that particularly through a process that we've been terming the Alliance for Biodiversity Knowledge, which is a kind of a loose but we hope effective way of coordinating collaborations across institutions. I think that's very much the way that we see our role as a convener of those activities, even though we will never expect to be providing all of those technical services ourselves as an infrastructure.
Okay, thanks, Tim. And Petteri, one last question before we break.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tim, for good presentation, and Nestor as well previously. So I would like to ask you a little bit of your opinions. How do you see the role of these national GBIF hubs? Like I'm coming from Finland, so we have FinBIF, which is quite advanced, and in a national scale, we have been thinking that this FinBIF is one core element for this national biodiversity monitoring data services, not only for national users, but also towards like a European interoperability of different data services like EBV portal. It might be something like that. So what's your opinion how Biodiversa Plus, for instance, could learn from your experiences of establishing national BIF nodes and their relationship for GBIF and a larger scale collaboration? Maybe that's the first question. So do you see a role for further development of national hubs? And then another is that what kind of data products you described very nicely, this right side of your figures, that there are a lot of possibilities how the data could be used. So how far GBIF has been thinking to really develop these different data products by themselves, or do you think that then it's a responsibility of the data users to get the original data and maybe make some kind of usable products? For example, like if there's a scientist or if there's a decision maker who would like to make an indicator or some kind of land use planning information based off the GBIF observations. So how far you see GBIF role in that data cultivation? So these two questions, thanks.
Yes, thank you for those two very important questions, and I'll do my best at tackling them. In terms of the national hubs, I think you're absolutely right that in some cases, our national nodes do act as hubs that combine a very rich and diverse set of activities and services that, if you like, already go beyond some of the core services that are associated with GBIF, and I would certainly say Finland is one of them. Now there is not a kind of a single standard model of the way in which our nodes always operate in terms of knowledge hubs, but I do think that particularly as you're looking at functions that cut across, let's say, the kind of service that a GeoBon installation or instance would bring together, and even a national sort of best type process of feeding into policy and so on, that I think that I would certainly see it as a very positive kind of model, that you have a single institution, or at least a network with a good, strong collaborating governance, brings together all of that variety of functions and services in one place, rather than having those distributed in different partnerships and different institutions that don't communicate very well together. So I certainly, and I think that looking, for example, and I just had the privilege of having 2 days at the midterm meeting of EuropaPon, which is, and it's, it's fantastic to see just in the stage of bringing together and documenting all of the different monitoring programs that exist in different European countries. I think looking at ways of making sure that those networks of monitoring programs are also well associated and well connected at the national level through a GBIF node or a kind of expanded node that acts as more of a hub, as well as, and I don't think these two things are at all mutually exclusive, as well as looking at ways in which that collaboration can happen at regional, at European level as well. So yeah, I mean, the short answer is that I do think that the idea of having more integrated knowledge hubs at a national level, you know, with at least associated with GBIF nodes would be a very positive way to go. On the second question, which is, it's a perennial issue actually about GBIF, is where, in a sense, where do the boundaries stop in terms of the bringing the data together, making it available, and then just, you know, do we just wait and see what people do with it? And I don't think there's a very clear answer. I think we are probably somewhat cautious about committing GBIF as the central infrastructure to providing a lot of those sort of onward information products and services that are immediately available and applicable to decision makers and to policy. And we see that kind of processing those products as activities that will typically be done a little bit, I mean, within our kind of broader partnerships, but a little bit more dispersed across different institutions. However, I think, and we've already done this, for example, in some of our training services and some of our guidance, at least being able to be very well responsive to the needs of creating those products and understanding with data formats and the access services, that we have to be conscious of how useful we are to those onward services, but also then to provide some training and suggestions for how the raw data that flows through GBIF can then be processed into information products for decision making. So I hope that slightly answers your question.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Good answer.
Thank you a lot, Tim, and Danny, and also Nestor for the presentations. So I would suggest that we now move to the break and come back in 15 minutes at 10:30. So we have a bit of delays, but we will try to shorten a bit one of the last session open for discussion. And Tim, you have a question in the chat. Maybe you could look at it. Yeah. And
I can answer that in the chat if you like. I don't want to go eat into people's breaks.
Well, in any case, thank you a lot for attending, and we will see you in 15 minutes at 10:30. And Alberto, I'm not sure if you can...
Now it's better.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Then I can let you introduce Lucia, and we can move.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And so now I'm happy to give the floor to Lucia Vaira of LifeOCeric in order to present the metadata structure and the workflows in LifeOCeric. Lucia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to share the screen. Tell me if you see.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, perfect. Just do. Okay. And now the presentation. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is the outline of my presentation. I will present you LifeOCeric with its main organization and governance. Then I will present the metadata interoperability need by taking into account the FAIR principles and the alignment with the EOSP interoperability framework. And then I will present the metadata structure and the main workflows in LifeOCeric by introducing you our metadata catalog and the eco portal, and then the status of the interoperability in LifeOCeric. Just some slides to present you our infrastructure. Lifeocerik is a European infrastructure consortium that offers e-science research facilities to scientists investigating biodiversity and ecosystem functions and services. Combining a wide range of tools, of ICT tools and resources with deep domain knowledge, the mission of Lifeocerik is to be the leading worldwide provider of content and services for the biodiversity research community in order to create new opportunities for large-scale scientific development and enable accelerated data capture and modeling thanks to the use of innovative technologies. As you can see from the map on the left, Lifeocerik is distributed in 8 European member states that correspond to the Lifeocerik national nodes. We have Belgium, Bulgaria, Greece, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, Slovenia, and Spain, and having its central components, the so-called common facilities located in 3 member states. We have the Statutory Seat and ICT Core in Spain, the Service Center here in Italy, and the VLab and Innovation Center in the Netherlands. Very briefly, what can a Lifeocerik user do? A user can find, access, work with, and reuse fair data collected at a global level. Moreover, it can use advanced search functions, thesauri, ontologies to further combine data and generate new services, can collect, process, and analyze data by using our workflows and virtual research environments, can get access to several training materials for the use of our services and our virtual research environments, as well as to PhD courses, webinars, summer schools, masters, and in general, other educational initiatives, and can receive support through our help desk, which is mainly based on a directory of scientific skills. Over the last 5 years, the common facilities and distributed centers have gone from being isolated elements to fully integrated into Lifeocerik, and the policies and rules are continuously being updated to support this kind of integration process. So considering the FAIR principle, the interoperability is considered in relation to the fact that, as from the definition, research data usually need to be integrated with other data. And data need to interoperate with applications of workflow for the analysis, for storage and processing. Here you can see the proposed principles for the interoperability. But in general, within Lifeocerik, achieving interoperability is essential to allow the federation of all the assets that are composing and that will compose also Lifeocerik in order to provide added value for the end user, for the final user. This means that our view on interoperability does not cover only data sets, but all the assets that are used in the context of research on biodiversity and ecosystem functions, so also services, workflows, virtual research environments, and so on. Following the EOSC interoperability framework, the interoperability can be analyzed by 4 main points of view, and a set of recommendations has been proposed. Indeed, we have the technical interoperability, that is the ability of different IT systems and software to communicate and exchange data, the semantic interoperability, that is the ability of computer systems to transmit data with the unambiguous and shared meaning. And then we have the organizational and the legal interoperability, that is respectively the way in which organizations align their business processes, responsibilities, and expectations to achieve commonly agreed and obviously mutually beneficial goals. And then the legal interoperability that deals mainly in how data should be correctly reused. So considering the technical interoperability, what is needed? The definition of a common security and privacy framework that includes also authorization and authentication infrastructure is needed in order to ensure a secure and trustworthy data exchange across communities that is easy to implement by resource providers, but also easy to understand by the users. Service level agreements should be easy to understand for all resources providers from different communities. There should be easy access also to data sources that commonly are available in different formats, in several formats, to try to overcome their heterogeneity and allow integrating data again across communities. Coarse-grained or fine-grained research data from other communities often are difficult to find, given the lack of knowledge about how their repositories can be queried. So general purpose and domain-specific research tools need to be made available. And finally, from the technical point of view, a problem arises for the fact that multiple service providers for different types of PIDs exist. And these, as a result, sometimes is that the identifiers are not resolvable. So again, here, a clear PID policy needs to be defined. Considering the semantic interoperability, there's a lack of common definitions about terms used by communities, and this is a problem, obviously, when trying to share resources across communities. There's a lack of common semantic artifacts across community, and often, if they exist, they are not open, they have no open license, and maybe not sufficiently well documented. There's a lack of common reference repositories or registries of semantic artifacts, like ontology catalogs. Indeed, only some communities are maintaining such resources. There's a lack of common metadata schema across communities that result in several schema being used in different communities. We have data site, DCAT, learning core, and so on. So a minimum metadata model should be adopted, not meant to replace existing standards, but to facilitate findability and to support interoperability, not only within domain-specific service repositories, but again across different domains and different communities. Then there should be an extensibility option to allow for disciplinary metadata that is very typical for some research communities, in order to allow users, researchers to add annotations according to the established practices of their own community. And finally, there should be also clear protocols and building blocks for the federation and harvesting of semantic artifacts. For the organizational interoperability, what is needed? All aspects associated to the governance structure, we can say in general, terms and conditions, policies, rules of participation should be all clearly defined and completed, obviously, with also with the management of the interoperability aspects. Often it happens that it's not clear for users whether the infrastructures or in general the services that they are using from other communities can be still running in the medium long term because of lack of knowledge about their sustainability policies. So also clear management of permanent organization name and functions needs to be provided. Finally, from the legal point of view, what is needed? Here, all aspects covering licensing over time, the copyright, data protection should be obviously taken into account and clearly defined and provide to users in order for be able to correctly reuse data over time. So as already showed before, the common facilities and distributed centers have gone from being isolated to fully integrated in LifeOCeric, and they have their own web services, their own data portals, their own data structures, and the LifeOCeric acts as main node for the coordination, development, and the operation. The overarching goal is to increase the collaboration within and among national nodes, but obviously also among external organizations in order to enhance findability, interoperability, reduce duplication, and improve information consistency and quality. To this purpose, we designed and developed the LifeOCeric metadata catalog, that is a standard-based information system based on GeoNetwork, that acts as a reference point to enable and improve the accessibility of different resources coming from the national nodes, but in general from a variety of external providers that are organized and documented in a standard and consistent way. Metadata attributes are related to datasets, research sites, services, virtual research environment, and workflows, and have their own standard. Indeed, each kind of resource has its own set of metadata fields, as you can see from the slide. In particular, for dataset, we use a metadata schema based on EML 2.2.0, while the other resources are based on ISO 19139. And this slide is just to show you an example of how resources are connected to each other in the catalog. Obviously, you can start from a workflow metadata record, which includes the URL of the contained services, and then you can access a specific service metadata record that includes all the included operation, and there you can find the input and output dataset. You can access the dataset metadata record, and there, when and if available, you can have the link to access the actual data. As indicated in one of the interoperability needs before, the use of a clear terminology is one of the essential aspects, and it is obviously highly relevant also in the LifeOCeric context. Indeed, the resources that are hosted in our metadata catalog exploit the work that we done within the working group D of the LifeOCeric internal joint initiative, where we defined LUPO, that is the LifeOCeric upper ontology, so that the key concepts, so the dataset services, workflow, with research environment, are well defined and agreed within the community. On the right side of this slide, you can see the model, the ontologist model with the main classes and the relationships. One of the main workflows is for the harvesting process that enables the possibility to import, export, and harvest datasets metadata records by using the user interface or the API. So hence for both for human usage and for machine-to-machine communication. The metadata catalog allows to use different harvesting protocols, and we mostly use the OAI PMH protocol. And as of today, within LiFoCeric, we harvest datasets metadata records from 4 national nodes, and obviously other external providers. Another workflow is for the mapping procedure in order to be able to convert format to map into LiFoCeric metadata profile to align standard to the same version, for example, from EML 2.1 to 2.2.0 and so on. Our most used method is the development of XSL transformation due to the possibility to specify the desired output according to the specific input. In this slide, you can see some of the next improvement of our metadata catalog that now is under maintenance. We will have some improvement of map features, editing tool, validation mechanism, editorial workflow. We will have then the semantic part, it will be integrated with semantic search and semantic annotation and so on. So the use of semantic resources giving a well-defined meaning and understanding obviously ensure the exchange of information among, in general, machines and people. And controlled vocabularies play an important role in metadata standards since they allow to define the meaning of each metadata element, of each metadata field, and the values that are allowed in that specific element, in that specific metadata attribute. Moreover, they can also help to find relevant data or provide information on how to interpret data and reuse it, but which are the main issues here? As indicated before in one of the interoperability needs, there is a lack of common semantic artifacts across communities, like general ontologies that can be shared. And in case they exist, they have no open license and no sufficient and adequate documentation. Moreover, there's a lack of common reference repositories or registries of semantic artifacts like ontology catalog. And to this purpose, we designed and developed the LiFoCeric Eco Portal. That is a repository of semantic resources. We have ontologies, vocabularies, thesauri, and so on for the ecological domain. And it's a web-based application that allows users to identify and select semantic resources for specific tasks for their interest, but also offers some generic services in order to improve, to maximize the efficiency of the work, so search, annotation, and other scientific data management process in general. So to conclude, analyzing the level of interoperability in LiFoCeric by following the EOSP interoperability framework, we can say that we are almost aligned with the framework, and that we cover almost all the analyzed aspects. Obviously, for some of them we are still working on, we will soon have outputs, but in general, there is a main gap that also represents the main challenge on this topic. The scientific community is associated to the need to overcome data heterogeneity and to allow integrated data across community. Indeed, as you can see in the slide, research data are available in multiple general formats or community-based formats. So usually it's hard to align such kind of data when reusing data sets across communities. Also, the semantic interoperability issues appear because of lack of agreement of attributes or column headers, the absence of headers or adequate documentation and so on. There should be extensibility options to allow the data, metadata annotation, as said before, and to this extent, we are developing a semantic platform that will allow users to do this kind of operations. So it represents a big challenge since the possibility to integrate data across community depends not only on the data and metadata structure and the format and standards, but also on other aspects like the heterogeneity in the adopted tools and methods to collect data. This is hence a challenge that requires a multidisciplinary work, a collaborative work in order to be addressed, as Professor Bassett was saying during the introduction to this workshop. Okay, I don't know if I'm on time, more or less. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Lucia. So maybe you can take one question or two if anyone would like to ask something. Pete?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Lucia. I think that was really good, important presentation in general for this workshop, and now also increasing our understanding about this topic and all these different levels of interoperability challenges. I like your classifications. It's really good framing for our discussions further. Also, that in which section we are discussing. So you mentioned this technical, semantic, organizational interoperability challenges. So what would be then your advice based on your life experiences for Biodiversa Plus and this collaboration now? That how would you guide our work forward? As you mentioned, these different communities might have different data sets and data formats. So
yeah, that's why we started exactly from the framework. No, yeah. It's a lesson that is still learning by doing, it's usual to say. Yeah, because we started from the ESC framework, since it is very structured. It has a possibility to be divided into 4 main points of view that are easy to follow and to deeply investigate. But because obviously each single point, obviously, for time and other reasons, it is not fully described, but obviously you can find it online. Each one organization has its own rule, policies, and constraints, you know. But starting from that framework could surely help you to understand which is at least the entrance level, the starting point for interoperability, and in general for fairness, if you want also to analyze the other letter of the fairness. So we started from that list, and we take each point of each point of view, and we are trying to close each one. So we are working on it. Obviously, we are not 100% complete, but it's very useful, like a to-do list, we can say.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think there were other hands raised, but no longer there. So if no other questions, Alberto, maybe you can.
We can go on. Thank you. And then I'm happy to invite to take the floor Sujevan Ratnasingham and Rutger Voss, who are going to present the Bioscan Europe initiative. Sujevan, I'm sorry if I made a mistake in the pronunciation of your surname. I apologize.
Yes, good morning. I will be speaking to you also on behalf of Sujevan, who is the Director of Informatics at the Center for Biodiversity Genomics at Guelph in Ontario, Canada. I don't think I see him in the participants list, and that's understandable given the time difference. So I'll drive here. I'm a researcher at Naturalis Biodiversity Center in Leiden, the Netherlands. Next slide, please. So I'm talking to you about molecular techniques. I'll quickly set the stage. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything really new, but this just kind of gives me a hook to hang the metadata stuff on. So DNA barcoding is basically a technology from the 1990s, let's say. So here, assume that you have a specimen, a known specimen, such as this bug right here. You sample part of it. Let's say here at Naturalis, we pull out one of the legs, we perform a DNA extraction, and then we amplify one or more of the barcode markers. So these are genes that have uniparental inheritance, such as mitochondrial genes, and whose rate of evolution is kind of optimal. So this is kind of Goldilocks thing, not too quickly, because then that would just swamp the structure in the data, not too slowly, because then all species look too much alike in their sequence. Anyway, so you amplify that gene, then you sequence it, can be multiple technologies. Sort of historically, that's of course been Sanger sequencing, but more and more now this is high throughput sequencing. And then that sequence data after, post-processing, quick quality checks and look if it's not contaminated, stuff like that, then it becomes a barcode record. So the record has information about the specimen, such as collection catalog number, the institution where it's held, probably a photo. It has information about the molecular process, so which marker was amplified. And there's some sort of, let's say, controlled vocabulary that identifies what primers are used, links to the trace files, and information about the taxonomy. So what's the species, who identified that, and something that you might call pseudo taxonomy, where on this large collection of data, a kind of clustering and refinement algorithm is run, which results in things that are called bins, which are somewhat like species, but not quite. But in any case, very useful for looking at the structure in the data. So this is DNA barcoding. And next slide, please. Just wanted to quickly compare and contrast that with the actual biomonitoring through meta-barcoding. So here we have a sample of which we want to know what's in it, as opposed to we already know the species. So the sample could be, for example, a water sample or soil or air, but maybe also other things like gut contents or commercial products. Again, we do a DNA extraction, and then we amplify one or more of the barcode markers, perform high throughput sequencing, and then from, let's say, the color coding here, you can see that is kind of a soup of different species with different colors. So then in comes the bioinformatics to sort the sequencing reads into different species, and then identify them against the reference database, which is of course populated with those known DNA barcodes from the previous slides. And then once we have our species identifications, all sorts of higher stats can take place to describe the alpha biodiversity within a sample, the turnover between samples or sites, so sort of beta biodiversity, with a bunch of different metrics and statistics. Next slide, please. So just to quickly summarize where we are in the field. Of course, high throughput sequencing is a story where we no longer say it's next generation, but it's, well, in any case, it allows us to cover many more taxa than previously for the same price or dropping prices. Also, the trend is towards sequencing many more barcodes, potentially also, for example, by way of genome skimming, which we then map against something like a mitochondrial genome template. I guess a general trend, and I apologize for the noise in the background, a general trend is that what started out as something that individual researchers might do because maybe they want to elucidate the systematics within one genus is become an institutional work process, which is run at scale. So that's on the production side. For consumers, there's more and more, let's say, large-scale integrative projects that want to harvest many barcodes, for example, for a particular taxonomic group, such as Unite, which works on fungi, or for a particular geographic area, such as the ARISE project, which is for the Netherlands. But there's also other types of consumers, for example, law enforcement, and this kind of ties in back to what I said about commercial products. Recently, we've done some testing, for example, of traditional Chinese medicine. There's also rising demand for corporations, sort of quality control, and of course, considerations of fair data are gaining more and more importance because we are in a landscape where more automation is taking place. Next slide, please. So the main organization within this space is the International Barcode of Life, which is a research alliance between nations. It has been around for about a decade and a half. and it stewards basically the entire chain of barcoding, from developing barcode reference libraries to developing standards for data and for processing, sort of steering role and enabling international collaboration, but also the development of informatics platforms, such as the barcode of live data system. So here on the right, you see sort of what the scale is there. About 800,000 of these bins have been identified, so kind of like species, not quite arguable, spread out across about 11 million barcodes, and there's very many different users. Next slide, please. So then briefly touching on BioScan, which is a more recent initiative, and BioScan is basically the next moonshot of eyeball. So this is basically just in the gathering strength kind of phase, which is focusing on really building the baselines for biomonitoring. And one of the big goals is to tailor this activity also to Europe specifically. And we do that within the context of a larger project that kind of runs in parallel with genome skimming. So now we're talking about barcoding. Genome skimming is obviously converging into the same kind of activity. Anyway, so BioScan has very ambitious goals, and then beyond that, we get even more ambitious. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to accomplish, and what makes it that actually today's workshop comes at a very good moment? So previously, this barcode of live data system was and still is a centralized database hosted in Canada. And what we are aiming for is a more decentralized infrastructure, which will have an important center of gravity in Europe. And so this is meant to basically ease the considerations or address the considerations listed here. So obviously with barcoding becoming this almost industrial process, we want to ease data submissions so that people don't have to do that by hand. And also we want to make it so that this plugs in more easily in the rest of the work process, which is also becoming much more automated, because these institutions have things such as laboratory information systems and workflow management tools to do the post-processing of the data. So we want to ease that, and that probably means that there needs to be more tailored submission infrastructure on the back end. Then on the front end, so for the data consumers, as I mentioned, there's these larger scale initiatives to reuse data. So that obviously needs to be enabled. And that also involves greater use of web service APIs as opposed to through the browser. Now, Bolt at this point has web service APIs, a couple of endpoints for sequencing data, for taxonomy, a couple of other endpoints. And right now, this basically has a RESTful API that gives you the sequencing data in a very shoddy standard called FASTA, which everyone who works with molecular data knows about and is always very unhappy about. But anyway, it is what we have. And beyond that, the metadata is provided in tab-separated tables. So none of this at this time is very much anchored in controlled vocabularies or ontologies. But that's on the map, let's say. So what we want out of that is more tailoring and more granular kind of web service APIs. So let's move to the next slide, please. So how will we accomplish that? The plan is to not have one big silo standing in Canada. We want to have different workbenches, which are local installs at institutions that need these. So here, the kind of blue sky vision is that some place like Naturalis might have a workbench locally installed, so that from our own workflow management system, we use Galaxy, if that means anything to you, we could push the data into our own workbench, and so that we could also control where it is stored, and manage access and tailor it to our own work processes. And then on the front end, we're also envisioning different portals that are a bit more tailored. So you can imagine, for example, if you have a national barcoding activity, you might have a national portal. However, these are all not going to be, little unconnected fragments. These are all orchestrated centrally. So there's the plan is for there to be some sort of, let's say, mediator, which can provide access to workbench data through portals and manage those rights. And most especially, it will have to manage some of the global identifiers. So this clustering and refinement algorithm, this binning algorithm, of course, has to know about all the data that's out there in order to, assign individual sequences to these bins. So that's going to be orchestrated centrally. And basically where we are right now is that this is the big plan. And for the coming year, we are having a community process to identify, well, how do we want to improve also the data, metadata, the interfaces, to meet the needs of a greater variety of user communities. And then starting from about exactly this time next year, a reasonably well-funded development process will take place over the subsequent 3 years to make all this happen. And then a part of the development work will be in Canada, and a part will be at Naturalis in our software development department. So that's the big vision. And I think I'm already near the end of my talk, so I think we made up for some lost time. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, I guess I just mentioned this. This is our planning. So we start with an initial clone of the existing portal, and basically that will be the basis to initiate a more open source code development model. Also a governance model that's more distributed beyond Guelph. The identification of a roadmap, and then in the subsequent years we implement that roadmap. Here, what I list as the participants are the close participants, let's say, who are members of this particular work package. So CBG is the team in Canada. We are Naturalis. Also, the European Bioinformatics Institute participates, and in this case, basically as a data consumer that wants to be able to serve up access to barcode data through their ecosystem. Another consumer in this work package is Unite, so the Fungal Biodiversity Initiative. And then there's roles for two, what I call here community stewards. So obviously, I guess we are aware of Elixir in the bioinformatics space, and then the blue sky thinking about where we want to go and what the roadmap should look like will be stewarded by the Botanical Gardens of Edinburgh. Now that's the nearby participants. Obviously, we want to connect to the rest of the community, and forums such as this are of course a great opportunity for that. Then I guess this was probably my last slide. Yeah, here we go. Thank you very much for listening and for the invitation as well. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Rutger. Same, I'm gonna ask for questions. So if anyone wants to say something, feel free to raise your hand. Christos?
Sorry, Cecile, I see no hands, and I'm just taking advantage of the situation.
Good.
The question is connected, to the previous comment I did for GBIF. There is this biodiversity knowledge hub, which is developed in the context of the bicycle project, and therefore there we have, Elixir, we have access to sequences there, but it would be, very helpful if Bold could connect, to this initiative at a later stage through their API. Would that be possible?
It would be possible if we build it, and we want to make such data consumption possible. So that seems like a very sensible thing to do. Yes. I guess it depends on so with this decentralized architecture, it depends a little the extent to which this would be in the core, or whether there would be, let's say, a particular adapter to make this possible. But the general idea is that this data starts living in a larger ecosystem and becomes available to consumers such as that. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Petri?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rutger, for this nice presentation and very important and fast improving component of all these biodiversity monitoring schemes. So I'm not that specific expert of this topic, but I know that there's a lot of discussions going on about these eDNA possibilities, how it could be providing novel approaches for biodiversity monitoring schemes for aquatic environments. For my understanding, it's quite advanced, and there are protocols coming soon, so there might be more harmonized ways how this could be then implemented in a national or other scales for monitoring purposes. But how do you see this terrestrial or other airborne eDNA approach, and what might be then the role of IBOL or your all of these initiatives that you mentioned in this European context, for instance? That how do you see the role of the Europapon, for instance, related to your work, what you are doing, or are you such independent and well funded and well organized already that it's maybe something then between the two different institutions, and or do you see that there's still potential for some kind of deeper collaboration between biodiversity monitoring guidance and these techniques, how it could be used for
okay, let's see. I guess the first,
maybe a messy question, but
yeah, no. Well, there's a bunch of things I guess I could speak to. So the monitoring and let's say the combinability of the data is a challenge that requires very good metadata. So what I've been seeing so far is that really at the national level, in various countries, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, I'm aware of initiatives. Of course, there's many more where how you sample things, where you do it, and what the environmental circumstances are all, of course, very important if you want to understand what the patterns in your soil samples or your water samples actually mean. It would be great if there was more harmonization. I am aware that this has been an ambition that's been around for at least over a decade. How do we describe the environment where we do the sampling to make this kind of data comparable? And it seems to me that there's a great need for more coordination. Now, what I described here in particular is the barcoding infrastructure, which you would need to somehow compare your samples against, at least under most use cases. So I cannot particularly, for me, I cannot speak to what we are going to do. Like, this is a very large kind of area, but there's obviously scope for much greater coordination and collaboration on these metadata standards to actually do this meaningfully across Europe, for example. I hope that helped a little bit.
Thank you, Rutger. And maybe one last question from Tim. Maybe I give you the floor.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Rutger, for a very interesting presentation. I was actually just going to comment on Christos's question, and I was going to address a comment he made earlier, just to point out that there's already been considerable work and outputs in helping to integrate data coming through from BOLD, but also from EMBL, so the INSDC sequences, and indeed the UNITE community, the fungal community that Rutger referred to, so that we already have significant publishing and sharing of data from BOLD in the form of occurrences that go into GBIF, and indeed mapping of OTUs, so both bins from BOLD, but also the OTUs that are coming through UNITE against the taxonomic backbone. So for sure, there's still much more integration we can do, but just to point out that this is an active process and already resulting in significant publication of this DNA first data through GBIF. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We can maybe move to the next session, or unless you wanted to say some very last words, Rutger.
Thank you very much. That's it.
Okay. Thank you to you also. And then maybe now we can move to the second session of the workshop, which is more going to be interactive with all the participants. And Hilde, if you could present a bit the objectives.
Thank you. Yes, the purpose of this session is really to have a very open discussion. I think it was clear from all the presentations that we have had so far today that there's a lot of know-how already. There's a lot of things that are going on, a lot of potential and things to build on. It's also clear that it is a very complex landscape, not only because of all the different actors in the field, but also, as was mentioned by Alberto in the very beginning, because of just the nature of biodiversity data and then the complexity of that and the different types of data. And then also we pointed several times to some of the challenges that we need to overcome in terms of data heterogeneity and challenges related to technical issues, legal issues, semantic issues, organizational issues. So there's a lot of things that is out there. So basically for Biodiversa Plus, as you know, we are a network of as members, the members that are at the heart are the ministries of research, but also the ministries of environment, which basically also means those that are funding and steering these monitoring schemes. Maybe not the ones that are truly experts in the technical aspect. So that's also important maybe for the discussion to understand what type of actors we cover compared to, for example, the type of expertise that you would have in networks, including also Europa-Bonn. So that's also where the complementarity comes in. So what we would like to discuss just with you today is knowing indeed, having this as a background of what Biodiversa is, what do you think or what are the main challenges that you identify in this field, mainly when it comes to maybe the European and the global level. The national level we can tackle later, but maybe at a more overarching level. And then what can Biodiversa specifically do to help to overcome? Can I maybe just have the next slide? So just to say that when we started Biodiversa, we had a few initial reflections ourselves, but these were very general. It's clear that there's a lot of things going on in projects like Europa-Bonn, and so then it's a question of how can we complement that with the actors that we have on board. There's a lot of things that we can do, I think, at the member state level, at the national level, trying to get a better understanding of these national and subnational data architectures, because that could also help us to identify some best practices and then make sure that these best practices get known and that we can have some capacity building around this. I think from the Biodiversa Plus side, what we also already initially thought was that there's a lot of things that we could do maybe in terms of promoting open data, accessibility of data, and also in line with the EU digitization strategy. And I think that also nicely links up with the work that was presented by Tim by GBIF. And then also more generally, there could be a role of Biodiversa just in having exchanges like the ones that we have now, and also trying to better connect these European research infrastructures with the global ones. So also some capacity building at that level could be useful. But these are just very general ideas. So it would be good if we can bring this down to very concrete activities that we can then also take up in the work plan of the next few years. So this is just a little bit of general background, general reflections that we had so far, but it would be really nice if, as an outcome of this meeting, we can maybe identify a few very concrete actions where we can help to promote data interoperability. So I'll hand over to you, Cecile.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Hilde. So we would just like to introduce you how to use the virtual tool that we suggest to use now to have like a written board to provide the feedbacks on the discussions that we will have. So we would like to use Jamboard. It's quite easy to use, so we hope this will work for you. So I will just put a link in the chat, and you will be invited to use post-its. So you can click on this little symbol, write what you want to say in the post-it. You can then choose the color for your post-it and just save it so that it will appear on the board. And then with the arrow there, once you click here and then on your post-it, you will be able to move your post-it on the board. So yeah, so before we move to the conclusion, I will just put the link in the chat. And I will change my screen to go. To go to the Jamboard. So we will invite you to go there. And we will first would like to have your ideas. I think some of the presentations already covered these aspects, but to discuss about issues that could be tackled for data interoperability. So we will give you like 5 minutes to post your post-its and issues that could be tackled. If you could choose green post-its, that would be helpful for us, and then we can discuss jointly about these issues. And then we will move a bit on for these issues what Biodiversa Plus can do. This will be a next step of the discussions. Yes, so just sharing the Jamboard. I encourage you to go on the Jamboard. See, and to provide your ideas if you have some for issues to be tackled.
Maybe one way to do it, Cecile, because we only have half an hour left, is that we could ask people to elaborate maybe a bit on the actions that we could do, and then maybe to explain that they can refer maybe to a few of the challenges that have been identified, so that we can at least have a good discussion on the actions and an understanding of why this could be something for Biodiversa to take up.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Should we ask maybe for more details for the post-it, the blue post-its that received some stamps, or should we start there? Or ask just the participants to.
Yeah, I think we will basically be. I think if we have half an hour, we should be able to run through all the blue post-its. But it would be nice if people, whoever put up the post-it, maybe elaborates a bit on it, and then referring back to some of the elements mentioned in the green post-its that could help us to understand what the issue is and how we can contribute. But I think it could be good as an outcome of the workshop that we have indeed kind of maybe
Absolutely.
a list of actions with the half an hour that we have left.
Yeah.
That looks really, really good. have
Yeah,
these.
really good indeed. So maybe we can start already, and if you have additional post-its, I'm sure you will find some room, but you can keep adding them. But maybe we can start with the first post-its there, the blue one. So who, I'm not sure if the person who wrote this post-it would like to react, but in possible support from Biodiversa Plus, it's Biodiversa Plus can propose best practices for leveraging funds for the modest but non-negligible cost of standardizing and sharing data. Otherwise, this effort is left out of budgets and plans. Okay, so
maybe someone wants to. Yeah.
I put that in. I didn't mean to put it top left so it would come first, but that's the way it came out. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's looking at ways of getting around the issue that, and we find this, you know, right across the sort of the open data landscape. I think that even we can always argue that that extra step of making sure that data is made standard and also shared under common formats. It's not a huge cost when you look at the total investment, but it's something which is just often just not factored into plans and budgets. And it's a kind of tragedy of the commons things, I suppose, that, you know, no one wants to take responsibility for it. Everyone has enough to do just to fulfill their obligations and meet mandatory requirements. So I think it's, you know, thinking of ways in which Biodiversa Plus can help, you know, best practices and design ways of doing things within Europe that factor in that cost and effort into standard activities. I guess, yeah, that's kind of what I had in mind.
Thank you, Tim. Quentin, you had a question? Or?
Yeah, it's just to follow up on Tim. So I totally agree with Tim, and plus I also had a post-it on there about both funding standards development, which is actually relatively cheap, but is rarely put as a bullet point in something you need to do within a project as a potential objective. Well, actually, I've never seen it as an objective in a call. The problem of credit for doing that kind of work is it's very minor. You don't get much credit for it. And there may be ways that Biodiversa could increase the profile of that kind of work. So not just standard development, but also just as Tim said, the work getting data into a standard format.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Any more comments on this post-its? Just if you share this thought, just kindly remind you to put a stamp on this ID. So if we move to this post-it, so we have adherence to the relevant standards is required in funding programs, including guidance and a list of standards. For information purposes, the list may not be comprehensive. So whoever put that post-it, do you want to?
Yeah, I put it. So I think it's like it's kind of related a bit to what was said before, which was on the funding, which I totally agree. But then it's funding plus more clear obligations, because right now in the project course of the European Commission, there is the requirement to adhere to FAIR principles, but this is a very generic mandate, and it doesn't, you know, adhering to FAIR principles can mean, I mean, as soon as you put there, I'm going to share the data in Zenodo, that's enough, but sharing the data in Zenodo doesn't mean that the data is interoperable at all. Yeah, so I think that some guidance would be important, even lists of standards. But I understand that those lists of standards can never be comprehensive, but at least it can provide such a guidance. Yeah, that was a comment. So, for example, when you are, sorry, just to elaborate a bit more, when you are, when the project is about camera trapping, development of camera trapping technologies for monitoring species in situ, then there should be guidance so that that data is actually mobilized to GBIF using the Darwin Core extent, and eventually using this extended, what is it now called, Tim? Yeah, like the extended data model, yeah, that GBIF is developing. So things like that. Or if you are developing a model product or an essential biodiversity variables product, then you would be using the ABV cubes. As I said, as a list, perhaps not as something mandatory, but some guidance would be good.
Okay, thank you. So this would be more for like funded projects of Biodiversa Plus. Then if we move to the posted below, we have defined playbooks for data management at different stages of the cycle: collect, analyze, publish, etc. So maybe it would be good to hear the person who wrote the post-it.
Yeah, hello. I wrote that post-it. It basically dovetails entirely with what Nestor just said. You know, just the advice of, oh, you have to make a data management plan and you have to deposit here or there. You know, it would be good if we have a bit more specific playbooks, like, okay, if you're going to collect data, what should you think about? What kind of platforms might you target? What kind of standards might you use? And then, okay, now here's the scenario, you're going to analyze a large data set. What should you consider? You're going to publish data somewhere. Just more tailored also to just help people say a bit more than just, well, I'll dump it all on Zenodo. It's basically the same point as previous post-it note.
Thank you, Rutger. And I see that someone just have added posted for mandated data management plans and the use of certain data management strategies within Biodiversa Plus projects. So I think this are quite close indeed. Okay, so here we have common guidelines to facilitate interoperability between monitoring data from the management and research infrastructures. Okay, so someone would like to comment additionally, or? Not necessarily. No one. Okay, so then we can move to the post-it below. It's capitalize on increasing profile of evolving techniques for explainable artificial intelligence with biodiversity and provenance-specific funding calls.
Hello, this is me. I don't know if I explained it very well on my post-it, so I'll try and do it better now. I'm coming at this from kind of a broader AI perspective, because now I'm working in a computer science department with a whole lot of AI people from other areas like health and social science. And what this is stemming from is some of those green post-its on the left talking about the fact that we have workflows where there are machine learning or AI kind of classifications, for example, and those aren't always very well documented in the provenance data. We don't know how far we trust them. We don't know what was used to train. We don't know how representative that was. And so often it's a bit of a black box. We don't have a very reproducible workflow for some of the AI that is happening with biodiversity monitoring. And I thought maybe we have an opportunity, because there is this huge wave of interest in explainable AI and trustworthy AI, that is leading to some better kind of documentation of these processes and and some standards and metadata standards for doing that across other domains, not just biodiversity. And so maybe we could coordinate a few examples, a few case studies, and maybe sort of get bids together where either biodiversity could be a single case study for a particular technique among others across different domains, or something more focused on biodiversity and its provenance. So that was what I was trying to say there.
Okay, thank you a lot, Lucy. Anyone wants to react or? No one? Okay, so yeah, Quentin?
Oh, there's no reacting. Yeah, I just want to agree with Lucy. Nice to see her here. And I think that links with several of the green post-it notes as well, to do with machine learning and the complexity of trying to communicate uncertainty on machine learning and the problems of bias training data sets and things like this, and all of the provenance that goes into all of that. So we really have some massive challenges there.
Okay. If you move to this post-it, so it's always needed a one-stop shop for collecting the relevant information needed in terms of monitoring initiatives and fair data. So example of standards protocol. So does someone want to react or present this one?
Yeah, Cecile, this was me. I think it's quite obvious what what I wanted to mention, because we even saw this day that there are a lot of things already going on, and you really need to be an expert in this kind of field in order where to go to collect which kind of information. And therefore, I think what I know always from different projects. So one-stop shop is always something which what people want. It is it is about signposting in the jungle of initiatives and standards. And this is valid for monitoring initiatives, as well as for everything related to FAIR of biodiversity data. And this relates to metadata standards, etc., and connecting initiatives, so that what I always hate is if we are going to reinvent wheels again. So just to avoid the double work and see in a targeted way where we can get the relevant information.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. Christos?
Just to follow this line of thinking, I think that one stop over point is fictitious. If we expect, in the near future to have just one entry point and find anything and everything on biodiversity research and scientific knowledge, I think that the community is evolving really fast. There are a lot of developments. There is a lot of innovation here, and all of them they find, sooner or later, the suitable place to be displayed, to be promoted, and also to be used. Therefore, what we have to expect is, the use of technologies that can help the user, to discover and also make use of the new things, of the innovation that it is being developed. Somehow we need, to live with that, and find ways, to make it better as for the user, for the client.
Thank you.
Maybe just to contribute a bit to this one-stop shop idea, there are some efforts going on, I think also by the European Commission itself, through the Knowledge Center on Biodiversity, where they have ad hoc groups, not ad hoc groups specifically focusing on monitoring activities. So that's of course for a very specific target audience, because that's the bringing together the current initiatives that are in the landscape, and making sure that they connect and that they understand what is going on and how they can create synergies. But maybe from there, it could be, there could be a bit more thinking on how to then enrich it with maybe the other actors that are not in that immediate small group. But I think there's some activity already, kind of initiatives going on to bring all this together and exchange. But I think it's a good point.
Nestor?
So the issue with biodiversity data is that it is so diverse and sometimes so extremely complex that I don't think, obviously, a single model will never, in my opinion, will never, or at least not in the short future, will not exist. I mean, there are those very important efforts that the GBIF is doing with extending the data model and so on, but still, I don't think it can be covered. And the same, in my opinion, is for infrastructures. I don't think there will be one entry point for European biodiversity data. So what is really important to work on is on federated infrastructures, I think, and then making sure that we facilitate the development of the tools so that the infrastructures can communicate between them and yeah, transfer information or communicate at least be able to query each other and so on, rather than one single entry point. I don't think that is feasible and even maybe not desirable.
Okay, so maybe if we move to this post-it to facilitate the integration across sectors. Does someone want to react to this one? It has quite a lot of support.
Good morning. That's a bit from my side here. I mean, the point is, if I look on Biodiversa, the big strength of the network is to link research and institutions, is how I understand it. One of them, one of the big strengths. And I would say Biodiversa can do a lot in that direction, supporting this knowledge transfer in both directions. So the transfer from research into the institutions and the other way around, learning from what's going on there, and also as many institutions have respective data and information. So maybe not ending up as a one-stop shop, but at least getting a better access to the existing information. And there are many aspects you can think about. There are a lot of things going on across sectors in parallel, which can be better synthesized. I mean, key issue can be better cost benefit for all of them, research funding as well as the monitoring obligations of the member states. It can be a showcase for how to link research and institutions also for the globally. Just to illustrate how to do this, there's a lot new technologies and advanced methods of monitoring which are maybe not really transferred into the institution. So this, I think this could be very fruitful and can affect many aspects which already have been said to a certain degree, and starting it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. So maybe the sort of following post-its is about data interoperability and semantic meaning, as mentioned in the presentation by LifeWatch Eric, to foster this and allow interdisciplinary use. Not sure if someone wants to react. If not, we have another post-it about well-established common best practices and guidelines, which I think is quite related to this post-it, which we already covered. So then we have the identifications of the minimum metadata sets of information that can be translated in all the major existing metadata schemes. Do we have a comment there? No, no one wants to react. So then maybe I can move to the third column, where we have specific funding and support for standards developments.
Yeah, that can just be clustered with the first ones we talked about. So the first, it's all linked. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so then I can. we don't really see it now, but we will know it's together. So then we have Biodiversa Plus could be a key actor together with the EU Science Service in Make BioAgora and the KCBD to see how this infrastructures and biodiversity monitoring center on biodiversity on European level could be a pillar under the KCBD. I think this one was by Jiska, but she already left, so I'm not sure we will have a comment there unless someone wants to react.
Maybe a small reaction, but I don't know exactly, of course, what you meant with this. But I think also coming back to what Nestor mentioned in terms of the fact that there's some thinking on setting up a biodiversity monitoring coordination center, and that this would build on also strongly building on, for example, the EBVs and I think maybe what and then Nestor also explained that there may still be, when it comes to the actual use in countries, it might be still quite heterogeneous, despite the fact that it's recognized in the CBD and in the IPES context. But maybe there could be a role of Biodiversa if you would have this type of center, and if there would be if this would be strongly building on something on standards like the EBVs. I think it could be a role of Biodiversa to make sure that this is really well known and accepted by the actors that will have to kind of fund this or getting this also implemented in their countries. So getting this awareness raising of what is already there and the potential. That could possibly be something that Biodiversa could do. And I think it also links back to what Marcus just said on getting things to the institutions. So there's a lot of things that are there already that we could lift, I think, at the institutional level. But I think all of that would be needed if we want to set up like this biodiversity coordination monitoring center. There's a lot of awareness and capacity that we should still do, I think.
Thank you, Hilde. So then we have another post-it about awareness increase. Increase the understanding of existing tools and standards. Okay, so this one is quite clear, but Quentin, yeah?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, because we were mentioning in the chat about the large east-west, north-south gradient in knowledge on how to, for instance, standardize data or to publish data and things like this, and that there's a lot could be done on capacity building, particularly in the more biodiverse areas of Europe, compared to the sort of northwest of Europe, we've got less biodiversity, but more of that knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. And then we have to harmonize data and methods across the heterogeneous research landscapes and link with national, regional, EU and global institutions. Okay, so this one is quite clear. Maybe to have some comments. Yeah.
Sorry, that was me again. And I mean, it's also linked to what I said previously, this towards the integration part. So, I mean, I think it's also the essence of this meeting to get it done, and there's a strong need for it. And as I more and more have the impression that the key problem, the key issue we have is simply the knowledge transfer from a faster and faster ongoing research landscape, which is also could also improve their own performance in terms of harmonization and integration towards the institutions in a very general sense, who also then feed into the policy processes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. And then I think we have help documenting the evolving landscape, including key standards, and continue promoting interoperability and integration. So this may be more about explaining does someone want to react, or is it all clear? And maybe as time.
Yeah, that was my post. I mean, it's quite generic and in covers some of the things that were made. You know, the specific points that were made before already. I think the Biodiversa can play a role in promoting standards, of course, also with the partnerships partners, you know, the research environment agencies and ministries in the countries, but also I think then maybe some kind of online overview of key standards with a decision tree also would be really useful for maybe some of the people who don't know where to go and which standard, which repository to use in which case, and it's really seems to be a complex landscape, and it's hard to expect anyone to always find the right place and right standard for each application, and this could also be helpful, of course, for those including the partnership as well as us at the European Commission designing calls and giving guidance on where research should make the data and outputs available.
Yeah, thank you, Bastian. And then I think that we have 3 more post-its. Also see that time is running, so maybe what we could do is, does the authors of these 3 last post-its want to react or say something, to comment? Or does someone has a question? So no one?
Yeah, hi, Dimitri here. I wrote one biodiversity plus could coordinate interaction between all these organizations. What I see is that the landscape is getting very, very large. There's a lot of initiatives. I think this one can go with help documenting the evolving landscape, and also always needed a one-stop for collecting relevant information. That goes together because things are getting so big. There is overlap between initiatives. We're all trying to do our very best, but maybe there might be a task for Biodiversa Plus to maybe have an overlook and trying to get things more together. I think that Europabond is doing this for the monitoring, but it's not only about monitoring, it's the whole complex system. And I think this workshop is an example that we bring together different initiatives. But as I know, there is still nobody or something who is looking to pick out and put stuff together that can work with that and that can work with that. We're doing our own lines, talk with each other, but that might be more organized. And I have the feeling that this can be something for Biodiversa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you a lot, Dimitri. I think this is an interesting and relevant comment also. Yeah, so for now, do we have additional remarks, comments, or should we move to the conclusion?
Maybe Cecile, one remark or comment. I'm wondering about all these the national landscapes. Who is collecting the information? Because I think that you will need to go to this level in Biodiversa as well. And are there some central entry points or so for collecting these informations?
Yeah, maybe Alberto also and Hilde, if you want to jump in, but so this was really a first step for us to try also to bring actors together, mainly for the international European landscapes. But we are discussing also about organizing more similar workshops, but more like allowing national and subnational initiatives to present themselves and their databases and data workflows. So this would be like a second step to also map more the landscape and understand how it works and bring actors together.
Surely. Cecilia, and as we have highlighted in the first slide, there are in this workshop already a number of national and regional institutions that are actually being the actor of monitoring the different member states. So that is going to be one of the good points already that I think we got with this workshop, to have this link that is now from the international to the national. And then we will make a dedicated workshop to the national one. Again, try to involve the whole group that is in here. So that is really I think it was really a good point in the participation to have both national and international actors in the workshop.
Okay, thanks.
Marcus?
Sorry, as I missed the first hours of this meeting, but didn't Europabond as a known work package on collecting the information about national biodiversity monitoring? And I saw this meeting also to link to both communities. So Hilde, you, of course, the master of this here.
No, indeed. So in the first part of the meeting, Europabond presented the database that they have. And then, so what we are assessing is to what extent we can further enrich this database, and then also getting a bit more information also on some of the national data architectures. And we have spotted already a few that could serve as a good best practice for other countries. But so yeah, we are indeed fully aware that Europabond is doing, has this database, and that what we could do is is rather see whether there are still some gaps to be filled from the type of actors that we have on board, and the networks and the stakeholders that we can bring in from the Biodiversa side. So it would really be to complement this work from Europabond.
Okay, so then if there are no other questions, maybe Alberto, you would like to say a few concluding words?
Well, just a few words, and then I hope that Hilde will also complement it. It's we were launching this workshop with aiming at having some overview from different actors of the international landscape working actively on this aspect of data harmonization and interoperability, and also to have a discussion that was raising the key issues that need to be addressed. And then we had in the very last part a lab that to say how Biodiversa can support the actor and the stakeholder. But I think that in this workshop, all you participants have supported a lot our activity in Biodiversa to addressing this point. I think it was really very, very useful. We are going to work on the outcome that are coming from this workshop and make available all the outcome to the whole group that is in here. So start continue working together. So that I think is one of the main points that we have got with this workshop. I only would like now to thank all of you a lot, and then ensuring that we are going to be in contact with all of you for the development of all this issue. We are inviting you to collaborate with us also in the next step that we are planning to have. And from my side, it's only this few issues, but I see Hilde that will surely also will want to have some concluding point.
If it's okay for Peter, I will give him the floor. He's the work package leader of the biodiversity monitoring work, so I'm so sure that he may want to say a few closing remarks. From my side, I'm just very happy that we had this workshop. It provides very good food for thinking, not just for the biodiversity monitoring work, but I think there were also some very good elements raised in relation to the Biodiversa projects that we fund, and in relation to bringing that also to the policy level. So just thanks a lot for this very useful meeting, but I will give the final words to Petri as work package leader.
Okay, thanks a lot, Hilde. And I just would keep it short, and thanks everybody for joining. This has been really excellent start for this work and collaboration. And thanks for Alberto and Senem for organizing this in particularly, but also all the speakers. So this is good continuation. Good to continue that work based on that, what we have heard now. And definitely it would be great if we can organize this maybe second workshop following up with this, focusing more for these national scale examples, and also bringing in more these ministries of environment in this discussion as well, and provide these materials what we have heard here for the network further. So very valuable. Thanks everybody.
And Cecile, on a very practical term, the slides can be shared in terms of
yeah, so on practical terms, all speakers, and many thanks to them, agreed to share the slides. So we will release them on the Biodiversa website, and I will send you the link after the workshop. And we will also share with you the recording of the workshop. We will maybe just cut the collaborative discussions, and so that you have maybe the conclusions, but at least so you can look at the presentations.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you to
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
See you at the
Bye-bye.
next
Bye, guys.
meeting.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.